Everything's fine? Lovely, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to make a start then. It's now 4:03. Please can I ask everyone to mute their microphones? Officers and guests, could you also turn off your cameras? You should turn on your camera and microphone when you speak, but please then turn them off again afterwards. All councillors must ensure that their cameras remain on. Could I please ask Democratic Services to begin recording? Thanks, Mike. Pnawn da, croeso I cyfarfod, diolch am bawb am dod. Good afternoon and welcome to Regeneration, Public Protection and Housing Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday, the 17th of January 2023. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and may be broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the authority. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Yes, thanks, Mike. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. None? Okay. Moving on, agenda item 3, flight tipping in the county borough. I'd like to present Councillor Michelle Simmons to present this.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invite to this scrutiny meeting this afternoon. Flight tipping in the County Borough, report author Paul Lewis, outlined in 1.1 to 1.4 the summary of the report. The Regeneration and Public Protection Scrutiny Committee members have requested a report which will offer them an overview of fly tipping, its impact on residents of and visitors to Merthyr Tydfil County Borough. The report identifies the current practices adopted by the authority in tackling incidents of fly tipping. The report identifies challenges faced by the service in tackling incidents of fly tipping. I'd like to clarify that this report does not include littering or dog fouling matters. These are matters outside the scope of this report and current remit of environmental health. This report identifies proposals to address fly tipping that are being progressed to improve the service to meet these challenges. I'd like to move you to 4.0 where we were. So the fly tipping function was passed from Neighbourhood Services to Environmental Health, who sit within the Public Protection Service area in January 2022. The purpose of the move was best to utilise a current Environmental Health officer who sat within the fly tipping team and to improve enforcement against offenders by working alongside other enforcement services. At 5.0, where we are now, I refer to the data in paragraph 5.5 of the report and would like to clarify the data for 2023 were for quarter 1 and 2 only. So that was the 1st of April 2022 to the 30th of September 2022. Essentially, this is data for half a financial year as compared with 2021-2022 is for a full financial year. The only exception for this is the data for enforcement activities. So the fixed penalty notices issued, prosecution files submitted, and the document production requests are for quarter 1, 2, and 3. So that's from the period the 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of December 2022. At 5.6, the report outlines the challenges currently faced within the service, and at point 6 is where we want to be and the proposals going forward to strengthen the future of the service. Point 7 then highlights what we need to do next, and subject to scrutiny feedback, we need to introduce the changes outlined in 6.1 to 6.9 and introduce the new operating method for tackling fly tipping. Bringing us back to the report recommendations at point 2.1 and 2.2. 2.1, the Scrutiny Committee to receive this report and consider its content. And 2.2, the Scrutiny Committee to offer any recommendations, feedback, observations to support the officers with future planning where appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Michelle. Sean, do you want to add anything? I open it for question. All right, great, thank you. Questions? Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, on the data, can someone confirm it says prosecution files submitted? There were none in 21-22 so far. 22-23, there's 13. Have any prosecutions been undertaken at all?
As we stand, the files are with our legal department. They will then lay informations that will be heard in the magistrates' court. I believe at present we are waiting for feedback on the initial tranche of prosecution files that have gone through.
Yeah, there's a batch of them. I think about 6 are due to go to court at the end of this month for the first hearing.
Is there any reason for the delay?
I wouldn't class it as delay, Councillor Jones, in terms of a prosecution file, and I think this is where, since fly tipping has come across to public protection, is to take a full prosecution file. You have to go through all legal procedures, and that will be offering formal interviews to potential defendants, putting through prosecution files, so that can take its time. And obviously we are talking about April to December of last year. So that period, as somebody who authorises the prosecutions, I wouldn't class those as being unduly delayed, because there is a process the officers have to follow. From the initial fixed penalty notice being issued, we obviously leave a period of time for that to be paid. If that isn't paid, then the officer will follow that up with formal letters, an invite for somebody to come in for formal interview, and then the officer will have to put a proper prosecution file together, which myself or Sian would assess meets the criteria, and then that goes through to legal. So I wouldn't class it as being a delayed process as we stand.
Okay. On 5.6.3, halfway down the page there, it refers to covert operations, and it says currently the service does not possess the necessary kit to undertake such operations and rely on the use of overt CCTV cameras as a deterrent. So I think that not only me, but other members over the years have asked about these cameras. Can I ask why we don't have the necessary kit? And if we're not going to have them, what are the reasons for it?
Okay, as I stated, in terms of January 22, when the service came over to public protection, we've reviewed all the covert kit that came with it. Unfortunately, a lot of this is dated kit. It's no longer fit for purpose. But what we have done is, since Sian has been in role, we've identified a budget, and we're currently in the process of buying brand new, up-to-date covert equipment that will allow us to take these more proactive covert operations. So the kit will be purchased. Unfortunately, the kit that we currently inherited is not fit for purpose.
So we will have them, through you, Chair, what, in the new financial year or before then?
Before then, we hope.
Right. And now these are the same type of movable cameras that Merthyr Valley Homes have had for some years.
As they're covert cameras, without giving too much away, as we're in an open scrutiny committee,
right.
They're cameras that we hopefully perpetrators of fly tipping will not identify. Right. Perhaps that's the most succinct way I can put it.
Right. I fully understand what you just said. Now then, we come to one of the most controversial issues in here, and that's private land. Some of us have been knocking our heads against a brick wall on this issue, not for weeks or months, but for years. Trying to explain to the members of the public where we've requested to have items dealt with outside the private land, and they've been dealt with. but they can't be dealt with in private land. The public just doesn't get it. It says in here, under 6.5, a review of what is deemed as private land will be carried out, which hopefully remedies some of the issues relating to the collection of fly-tipping bordering public land. Action can be taken against private landowners under a wide range of legislative tools. Discussions with relevant directors are taking place to ascertain the best path to pursue. So, having read that, my question is based on the fact that we have current legislation which various departments have between them, particularly environmental health. When it says that discussions are happening with directors now, how long would this take? I mean, I made inquiries probably going on for a 12 months ago about this, and I was told there's meetings taking place. So I don't know what's happened in the last 9-10 months or so. So when will this happen? Because unless and until we take action against the landowners, because a lot of them will not bother to do anything.
Chair, if I can answer part of the question, and perhaps I can then refer to Sian, who can perhaps give a bit more in-depth indication as to the environmental legislation that would apply. With private land, the fly tipper is liable, be it private or public land. So if we can identify who's fly tipped, if it's on private land or public land, we can pursue action against the perpetrator. So that's the enforcement arm, and that remains the same. That's always been in place. I think it's the collection of the waste or instructing the private landowner to remove the waste that has never been proceeded with. You're quite right. There's a range of legislation. Sian will go into the environmental health side and what we would need to prove. There's obviously, as Councillor Jones, who's experienced for the authority, will know there's planning legislation that can be used. Up until a certain period, it was always deemed that the private landowner is sometimes the victim, in that they are subjected to fly tipping on their land through no fault of their own, and then they could incur expenditure. But I think we've got to a point now where that next arm needs to come in terms of corporately, how are we going to address private land? Councillor Jones, all I can say is it has been raised and it is being discussed, and I'm waiting for further guidance on how we're going to proceed with private land instruction about removal of waste. Sian, I don't know if you want to add anything on public health.
Yeah, so there is a hierarchy insofar as the evidence that we have, and fly tipping legislation is fairly straightforward. If you have identifiers there, or you have a witness that's witnessed it firsthand, the actual fly tipping offence happening, then that's the route we would take. Without that evidence, either of the identifiers or somebody witnessing or CCTV, we're left with then deciding, is this a public health issue? If it is, we can tackle that through environmental health legislation. But if it's inert waste or unsightly, then if it isn't a public health issue, then that would probably fall under the planning regime. And from my understanding is that threshold is quite high. It's an amenity thing, not just a nuisance. It is a tricky conundrum. It's something that lots of authorities struggle with. Do you go after the landowner who, of no fault of his own, has had this rubbish laid on their land? It's easier when it's wasting gardens and so forth, and you've got an owner-occupier there. But we're not alone in Merthyr in struggling with this conundrum, and I hope the directors will be able to resolve this shortly. Obviously, there's a cost implication as well.
Do you, with this discussions taking place, how soon do you think that this matter will come to a conclusion and you know exactly the path you're going to take?
I think from the report and the review of the service and where we want to be, The only two outstanding items are the return of waste collection back to waste services and a corporate view on how we're going to tackle private land. So they're the only two elements that are outstanding, and we are ongoing discussions with the directors on, with legal advice on what stance we're going to take on private land.
Right, thank you. I think there's one last question I've got. Under 5.61, reporting factor, they said there's several mechanisms for reporting fly tipping, includes phone calls, emails, web forms, and elected members' contacts. Would you also like to include in there that individuals can report it at the reception counter in the Civic Centre? Since we've now open a full week from the end of October, that should still be able to happen.
Quite right, Councillor Jones, and that's something I've omitted myself, so apologies.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Clive. Thanks, Paul. Any other questions? Councillor Williams-Price.
At 5.5, even allowing for the shorter period, as outlined by Councillor Simmons, it still appears to be a reduction between the previous financial year to this. Just why do you believe this is?
Sorry, could you just repeat that again?
At 5.5, which outlines the number of fly tipping reports from 21-22 to the current year, even accounting for the shorter period, I understand the current year only includes the first quarters, it still appears to be a notable reduction in the number of reports. And I was just wondering if you have any information on why this would be?
I can't give you a definitive answer, but obviously it was administered by a different department at the time. So whether the capturing of data has changed, I'm not sure, or whether, you know, it might be things out of our control, such as the pandemic and what effect that has had. I don't know is the answer. Sorry.
If I could just add there, the opportunist in me could say that the enforcement action we've taken up until this date may have a negative impact on individuals continuing to fly tip, because obviously if you look at the figures for 22-23, we've issued 17 fixed penalties. Prosecution files have been submitted, so hopefully the public are seeing that if you are caught fly tipping, you're going to end up in court with a heavy fixed penalty notice, which is where we want to head to. But perhaps that's opportunist of me, and it may just be a coincidence.
If I could just come back on that then. So is there a possibility for that to be explored if there is a difference in reporting or collection of that data? And then just to follow on from your point, Paul, is there a specific communication strategy in place about enforcement?
Yeah, we hope once we do get hopefully successful prosecutions to do some publicity around that, to get the messages out that Merthyr are, you know, serious about offenders of fly tipping. So that's our intention, but we're waiting for that to go to court first.
Thanks both. Councillor Salmon, got a question?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question in regards to clearing fly tips. You mentioned earlier that obviously it's been clearing fly tipping has been changed from neighbourhood services scrutiny, neighbourhood services over to regeneration. I'm just wondering, do neighbourhood services still hold part of the responsibility for clearing fly tips? Because I reported a flight tip last week, but the boys said they can't move it because it's under the responsibility of the Parks Department. So does some of the responsibility still lie within neighbourhood services?
Councillor Salmon, the difficulty we have, there's all sorts of waste that can be left, from excess waste from individuals putting their wheelie bins out and putting too many black bags out alongside it. Opportunists who will put waste alongside commercial bins in the town centre. And this is one of the recommendations why we feel that waste collection is better dealt with by one department, so you don't get two different departments both collecting waste. So it does depend on the circumstances. If it is a fly tip, then that would remain as we currently stand with the fly tipping team with environmental health. Other forms of waste, which would be, for instance, commercial waste, or as I said, excess waste, that would still remain the responsibility of neighbourhood services.
Thank you, Paul. Just to give you some clarification and insight into this, it was fly tipping in and on Karaka football field.
What I will do, Councillor Salmon, is I'll make sure we look into that and come back to you directly with the response.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Declan. Any more questions? Councillor Jones?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's on relation to paragraph 5.4. It refers to proactive operations conducted in hotspot locations as part of the multi agency working with partners, such as the South Wales Police, and it refers then to these operations mainly involve commercial vehicles. We come across many of those that I presume are intent on fly tipping somewhere, and is any of these one of the 13 prosecution files which you're waiting to have dealt with?
So they're not one of the 13 that are being prosecuted. As you can see in 5 point, I think it's 5.5 the table there, it shows that the number of documents produced, you know, you could argue that this is part of our communication strategy in being out there, visible enforcement action. So when we receive the documents, they are legitimate usually, but it sends a message out there. If I'd been stopped and I intended to fly tip, I'd probably make sure it was being tipped in the right place if I had somebody chasing documents for it. So it's more to get the message out there, I would suggest.
So, Chair, so far, am I right? We haven't caught anybody red-handed or police or whatever, not yet.
Not in the time that has been over environmental health. I can't comment as to before that time.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Problem. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just on a fly tipping hotspot, if you like. Paul, is one for you, because we've had many conversations over the time I've been in just regarding the tram road area behind the kebab shops and that, you know. And I take on board what you say about the new cameras coming in, and hopefully that'll be one of the places to have one. But what I've noticed, as you know, I drive around the town all day, every day as a taxi driver. I notice there's a lot of waste, if you like, being left on the front in the town, in front of the church on the bottom of Roberts Lane there, and the actual bins opposite the Vulcan. I see there's a lot of cardboard which is being left, and I know they're supposed to pay for a roll of tape, if I'm right, if that's still ongoing, and they tape the cardboard and the boys will take it. But it's not taped up, so the boys won't take it, obviously, and it's left there, it's soaking wet, it's all over the pavements. So I think we need somebody to go up and educate these people again of what they're supposed to do, the shop owners and that, if you can, because it's disgusting when people walking through that town there, and the fly tipping up that pavement is terrible.
What I can say, Councillor Thomas, I agree with you. I think, and once waste is left, it attracts others to come and accumulate. What I do know is that from neighbourhood services perspective, they've required SPF funding for specific officers who will be able to go out and educate the trade on correct use and correct storage of waste and presentation of waste. So corporately, there is funding application in SPF funding for these officers. So they're going to be of great benefit because they're going to be working with the businesses daily and ensuring waste is presented effectively. And that way it doesn't act as an attraction for others to come and latch their waste on the back of it. It's one of the cases that we did take originally. We were looking at waste that had piggybanked on the back of legitimate waste. So how even legitimate waste is presented can act as a magnet to those who want to act illegally. So it is a difficult balance, but it is something corporately, it is being addressed, and we are having funding to bring in these specific officers to educate the trade.
How close are we to that, Paul? Any idea? Or
the funding, I believe, has been approved. So we're
Right,
just going
okay.
through. I mean, Chris is here, thankfully. Chris can update on it. But I think we are crossing T's and dotting I's now, Chris.
Yeah, so automated for RCT by UK came December 23rd. The approval of the plan will bring a report back to council on SPF. But Paul's right. It's one of the leading projects we want to enable quite quickly, really. So we're talking weeks, Paul, I believe, rather than months. So hopefully there'll be opportunities for not only this project, but other projects actually on the periphery of, you know, SPF opportunities.
yeah, Ross.
Any other questions? Oh, I got a couple. 5.5 current data. It says flight tips cleared within 5 days, 500. Is that out of the 641 within 5 days? It says number of flight tipping reports 641. So is that 500 out of that?
I suspect that is correct. That is the 500 out of 641 because that is specifically for council land. There's the 500.
Okay. When I was part of neighbourhood services previously, we was always given the data that flight tipping was cleared 100% within 5 days. Never quite believed that myself, but yeah, that seems like, you know, our target is 5 days. It seems like quite a lot not being picked up within 5 days.
Yeah, that first figure includes all flight tipping reports, so it could be private land as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there was one more. Yeah, incidents on private land. 21-22 it was 216, and then 22-23 it says 39. I'm guessing that's 39 new ones, and the 216 are still there. That'd be correct. Yeah. And then over page and it says 6.3. The hit squad are currently within the enforcement team, and they're going to go back to neighbourhood services. Is that? I think that's what it says. Is that imminent, or has it happened already? Or?
It hasn't happened to date. It's ongoing in terms of discussion between the directors, but it is something that we're expecting within a matter of months rather than any longer, Chair.
Yeah, I think it works better within sitting the flight tipping within the neighbourhood services. Because they're the ones picking up the waste every single day. So yeah, it does make sense. My last question, RSLs. Do we issue enforcement fines on behalf of RSLs?
If it's flight tipped waste and we can prove who's flight tipped, we can take action. We are in, Sean has done a lot of work up until now in terms of joint working with the RSLs on other waste related matters. And I don't want to dip into the next report because I think Sean will update you on work we take in there. But this will form part of that closer working with the RSLs. So again, if they've got any intelligence or support they can give us in terms of catching perpetrators, then we're more than happy to work as we do with community safety and across public protection. So I think that's the benefit for the enforcement sitting within public protection is we've already got those data sharing agreements and those contacts. So I think that will benefit. But yeah, it would be something we'd look to work with them on.
Well.
And obviously, subject to us getting the appropriate evidence, we'll certainly take action.
Excellent, thanks, Paul. Any other questions? I don't have any. Nope. Okay. Comments? Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a short comment. I sincerely hope that the meetings taking place between departments can be resolved as soon as possible. And I think everyone, every elected member of the council will look forward to the day when we've got COVID cameras working and in situ and picking up vital information that you can then channel into ultimately the courts. Because until the message is out there in a very clear way that if you fly tip, you're liable to be caught and you're liable to prosecution. And I think that will be the message that most of those who are the current culprits will probably understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive. Any other comments? Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Clive said there about the cameras. Really, it'd be great to see them, because I think people these days are getting wise now to leaving addresses or whatever in their black bags. Or they just throw in everything. Like I saw one 3 weeks ago, 3 cars in front of me by Thomastown Park, and he just threw a carrier bag out the window. I just stopped, picked it up and put it in the bin in my house. But, it's ridiculous. And I think they're getting wise to it, because there was nothing in there when I had a look. It was empty. But yeah, we welcome those cameras ASAP.
Thanks, John. Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I appreciate it wasn't a question, but a comment. All I'd say, Councillor Tubbs, I hope the cameras aren't seen. So I appreciate members may want to see them, but let's hope the public don't, who are offending. And secondly, yeah, that was the first thing, in fairness, when Sian came in post, she did detailed analysis on the number of fly tips and the number of identifiers within fly tips, and it's small. So to concentrate our resource on reactive wasn't getting to the nub of the matter. So hopefully this flipping approach will mean we'll be able to capture either people who are doing it commercially, or those who are a bit more savvy and aren't putting identifiers, but are quite active in dumping their waste. We can go after the ones who perhaps are trying to buck the system.
Thanks, Paul. Any other comments? Okay, thank you for that. I'd just like to thank you for your report. Fly tipping within my ward in particular is it's something that needs addressing quite quickly, and obviously there's the antisocial behaviour team within Merthyr Valley's home. So hopefully we can work in partnership with them to resolve the issues going forward. So, but thank you for the report. Moving on, item agenda 4, pest control within Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council. I'd like to ask Councillor Michelle Simmons to present again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Pest control within Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council, report author Sian James. Summary of the report outlined in 1.1. This report provides an overview of how environmental health discharges its duties relating to controlling public health pests. It also provides an insight into the current demands, resources, enforcement and value added work of joint working and the delivery of a paid for pest service control service. Some key elements of the report to highlight. So the main duty on local authorities under Prevention of Damage by Pests Act 1949 is carry out such inspections, destroy rats and mice on council land and otherwise to keep such land so far as practicable free from rats and mice, enforce the duties of owners and occupiers of land. The environmental health team deliver the informal and formal interventions, including enforcement having regards to the Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council Compliance and Enforcement Policy 2019. The Pest Control Service is a service to eradicate pests pests, not pets, sorry. There is no requirement for Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council to provide a pest control service. However, the existing service is essential, providing an affordable service to residents where they are affected by public health pests. The pest control service was free to residents until 2018. Since then, all pest control treatments are on a charged for basis. The fees for pest control work is indicated in paragraph 3.6 of the report. At point 4, and it highlights the demands, and the graph in paragraph 4.1 shows the number of calls relating to rats in properties the year before the start and after the pandemic. Pendarren Ward is consistently showing the highest levels of demand. With resources at 4.2, pre-2018, there were 2 FTE. So FTE means full-time equivalent, a unit that's used to measure employed persons. So 2 FTE pest control officers and 2 FTE delivering dog warden functions and responding to complaints of abandoned vehicles. Now, there are 2 FTE discharging all 3 functions, a 50% reduction since 2018. Joint working since November 2022, there has been a pilot on joint working within a registered social landlord, waste services and environmental health in trying to bring environmental improvements to the areas most affected by rats infestation. Some of the actions noted for the pilot project is included in paragraph 4.4.1 of the report. Just to summarise where we want to be, owners and occupiers are responsible for the condition of their premises. Environmental health will continue to take enforcement action where necessary in accordance with the compliance and enforcement policy. Works in default will not be the first option. The pilot joint area approach will need to be evaluated with a view to considering who is best placed to lead these projects and whether is beneficial focus on other areas where there are high levels of pest control service requests. An agreed referral process from pest control technician to RSL is required for timely intervention by the RSL to structural or hygiene issues at their premises. We welcome any questions the committee may have, but just to bring you back to 2.1 and the purpose of the report, this is to provide information on existing practices to control pests within Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council. The information contained will allow scrutiny members to act as a critical friend, challenge to current practices and consider how different approaches may improve service delivery, behavioural change, hence improving wellbeing outcomes. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Simmons. Any questions? Councillor Jones?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First one is on page 12, 3.7, the current fees there. It says for dealing with domestic fleas is £100.60. Are there particular reasons why that charge is so high? And do we have many complaints registered with the department on fleas?
No, we don't get very many of them. It's to reflect the fact that you have to treat the whole property rather than just put bait down in particular locations, and the cost of pesticides as well associated with treating a whole property.
Okay, that's fine. Page 13 under 4.2, it's particularly been pointed out by the cabinet member, the resource, and it refers there to the fact that I don't know, it's since 2018, at that time there were 2 full-time equivalent officers dealing with pest control and 2 officers full-time equivalent dealing with the dog warden function and responding to abandoned vehicles. Now, in 2023, there are only 2 full-time equivalent posts, which deals with a lot. And of those 2 officers, they would both be entitled to, presume, 6 weeks holiday. So for 9 months of the year, we've only got 1 officer dealing with all these services. And if that particular officer is just there and the other one's on holiday and that officer goes sick, we have no one to deal with all these issues. I just feel that we really need to look at the resource to cover that. I mean, and as far as the dog walking function is concerned, perhaps one of the officers can correct me if I'm wrong. But can a person see if a dog is a stray and can identify this as stray? Can they just pick up the dog, put him in their car, and take him to the dog warden function dealing with it, which I now understand has now moved to Pontypool?
That's correct. It's there's a new kennel that's in the process of signing a new contract. Unfortunately, the previous kennels was not able to continue with their contract, so we did go out far and wide for interested kennels, and yeah, that's what we've been able to secure.
And can a member of the public literally pick up a stray dog, put them in their car, and if they can find this place, take them there to the kennels, or has that got to be done through the department?
We are in the process of sorting out the process for that. It changed after there was a reduction in full-time equivalents after 2018. We do need them to register with the council to say that they have found it, but yes, they can take it to a kennel, but it needs to be registered in the first place.
Thanks. Not that I would ever attempt to pick up a dog and put it in my car, and then try and find somewhere in far distance Pontypool. But do you accept the fact that as there's only 2 full-time equivalent to cover all these services, that it's quite restrictive on what can be done on any one day, where, as I said, for 9 months of the year, there's only going to be 1 member of staff?
Well, for the last few months, we have only had 1 environmental health technician discharging this function because the other post became vacant back in, I want to say, August time, and there was a review as to how we would proceed, and given throwing in the fact that we were losing a kennel contract as well, it became very difficult. However, I would say that the greatest demand on those posts is pest control, first of all, abandoned vehicles, secondly, and dog warden, whilst it being statutory, is the third demand, much lower, but is statutory. So it is quite a juggling act, I appreciate, but that's the resource that we have at the moment.
But through you, Chair, you consider that you have the capacity, current capacity, to deal with all of this?
The last few months have been tricky, and also taking into account we're now we have got a new technician and who started today actually. Obviously, he needs some time to bed in and induction and all that, but we will have 2. The fee charges, whilst there is still a fee for pest control, it is significantly subsidised. So there is quite a demand on that service, given that it's much cheaper than going out to private sector. There'll always be that high demand because it is a lot cheaper than the private sector. There have been occasions where we've had to put a pause on the service if there has been sickness and no one there. But it is quite a juggling act, yes.
Next question is on page 14 under 4.2.2, where you refer to the total staff there of 4 full-time equivalent environmental health officers and 1 principal environmental health officer. Could I clarify, Sean, that you are in the 4?
No, I'm not in the 4.
So you're in addition to the 4 and the principal officer, is
Yeah.
that correct? And at the time that we were dealing with the capacity problem in the department, because I was chairman of the audit committee, as Paul will remember, and we called this into the audit committee, and I think as a consequence of that, I thought there were 2 principals EHOs there, but that's not the case, is it?
There are 2 principals within environmental health. The other manages the food, health and safety and infectious disease. And there's 1 for this service as well, along with housing and pollution control.
So there's 1 principal officer, is that
Yeah.
correct?
One for this and 1 for...
So there's 2 principal
Yes.
officers. So it's 4 full-time equivalent, plus 1 principal EHO, plus another principal, and plus yourself, is that right?
No, the hierarchy isn't like that.
Right.
It's myself as the environmental health manager. Then there's a principal, and then there are the EHOs plus the
Right.
technicians.
Right. Because I thought the original plan, but we saw, was going to be 2 principal officers. Is I wrong?
No, I think to clarify, the report that's with you today is in relation to environmental protection element of environmental health. So we've got another team that sits under Sean, which is a principal officer,
Right.
which, as Sean said, they deal with the food safety,
Right.
infectious disease.
Sorry.
So there's 2 separate teams, but obviously environmental protection, which is pest
Right.
control, has
Right.
Melissa as a principal and 4 EHOs.
Right. When I read that paragraph, I presume you're talking about the whole department. So thanks, that clarifies that. Right, down on the same page, and 4.4, joint working. Having read that and reread it, you've obviously got a pilot that's ongoing at the moment. And it's already been mentioned by the cabinet member about the issues in Penydarren ward. I presume you're talking about the issues you got in Galnacha, which is in Penydarren ward and has been there for quite some time, for many years actually. And there's a number of points on there, on the action points that you're trying to deal with this. What I cannot fathom out for the life of me is that there are still tenancies which have to be managed by Merthyr Valley Homes. Some others are bought the properties privately. But why on earth can't Merthyr Valley Homes deal with the management issues here? If gardens are being kept in an absolutely appalling and filthy state, which is caused by problems with the way that they manage the gardens, it's not looked after properly. There's a rat problem there. Surely, first and foremost, it's the responsibility of the landlord, which would be Merthyr Valley Homes, when they're dealing with tenants, or private tenants can be dealt with elsewhere. So I know it's been referred to here, but why aren't they managing the properties as they should do?
I can't comment on that because that's a question that needs to be posed to Merthyr Valley's Homes. We've identified that there is a significant rodent issue in a particular part of Penydarren, which is why we're now piloting this approach of working with them. Lots of the issues sort of bridge between waste management within the council and and with the registered social landlord in this case. This is a pilot, and whether eventually, because our role is enforcement, but we've recognised the need to bring them round the table. Now, longer term, it might be more appropriate for Merthyr Valley's Homes or Waste Management to chair such meetings, because most of them are dealing with waste issues. But I honestly can't answer on behalf of Merthyr Valley's Homes, I'm afraid.
Right. I'm including those points, but halfway down the aspects of the work and the outcomes. It refers to work planned in January, February 23 to bring all boundaries back to the correct line, including the clearance of the culvert at the back of the properties. Can you explain to me what you mean by bringing the boundaries back?
These particular properties have been neglected for some time, with significant overgrowth and some waste as well. And it's the social landlord's suggestion that they do need to bring them back to the line of the fence line to ensure they eradicate all the waste to address some of the harbourage issues for pest control.
So the fences have been broken and you can't
Yeah, I don't know what the conditions of the fences. There may even be chain
Right.
fences behind overgrowth. I don't know.
I think sorry, Clive. Yeah, I think Second Avenue backs onto Goitre Lane. There's a culvert underneath where Goitre Lane, Goitre, the stream goes underneath. So the gardens are like amalgamated into one. So I think that's what they're referring to.
Right. Thanks, Chair. That clarifies it. Okay. One other question is on page 15, 4.4.2. It says Environmental Health Service will refer cases of road infestation to Dŵr Cymru, Welsh Water, to investigate where defective public service are suspected. Members of the public are able to refer such defects directly onto Dŵr Cymru, Welsh Water website. Has this started? I certainly wasn't aware that you could directly refer to Welsh Water about rodent problems.
Yeah, the pest control technician does regularly inform occupiers of the need, if he considers necessary, to report issues to Welsh Water. Officers also will do that if required, and they will come out and do an investigation if there is a known rodent infestation and there's an indication it could be a defective sewer. They will investigate that and repair as necessary in a timely way.
Right. Now I'm going to ask this, Chair, and I will preface it, so bear with me. As far as pest control, environmental health, up until 2018, knew exactly where all the rat, mice problems were at any point in the county borough, I would suggest, because complaints came from the public, the vast majority of the public, to environmental health. But since that's been changed, you've now got a charge. So some residents will come to the authority, others will go to private contractors. And then there's a third element of those individuals who think they're the world experts at laying poison and probably killing a few things, including cats, etc., in the process, because I would argue that a lot of people do not know what to do until they bait properly. So do you accept as a department that you've got no view of where all the problems are, because you can only know the ones that have complained to your department and have paid the fee? But in the case of private contractors and those individuals that are trying to do it themselves, you wouldn't know about them. So am I right or wrong in saying that you don't know where all the rat populations are in the county borough?
I would say prior to 2018, you probably wouldn't know where every rat was within the district. How many are currently going to the private sector? I don't know. I'd suggest it's quite a leap from the fees that we charge to what the private sector do. And for those that are treating themselves, I'm sure that was happening as well before 2018. I would discourage that practice wherever possible, because you can make things worse. I would suggest that we never know exactly where all the problems are, but we've got a good idea.
I would suggest and argue that up until 2018, because the vast majority of complaints, in my view, was coming directly to the Environmental Health Department. So you'd have the data, you'd know where all the complaints are. Since that time, that's not now happening. And I think it's a real situation, in my view, that I think you need to know as environmental health officers. And I'm not talking about individual rats, I'm talking about rat populations. I mean, we've got one just a few feet away from here in my ward, unfortunately, on the British tip. So I think there's an issue there.
Potentially, if they don't come in as actual service requests requiring a pest control officer to come out, very often they come in as more of the enforcement arm. It's either, you know, rats are seen in other premises, or there's litter, refuse in gardens, things that are likely to attract rats. They may not come in as a service request wanting pest control, a treatment. They may come into us as other types of complaints, but potentially we're not receiving all the calls as suggested. I wouldn't have that data, I'm afraid.
I think Paul wants to come in.
Yeah, just to come in on that, Clive, I can see obviously what you're alluding to is when the fees have come in, there's a potential that people aren't asking for a service, trying to do it themselves and creating a rat problem. All I can say on that is on page 14, Sian outlines in the joint working that we're doing is the particular RSL we're working with at the moment is going to be paying for pest control at their properties. So although there's a fee, it's taking that burden away from some customers. The RSL will take that up, so it should start to give it a clearer pictures on some of these RSL properties, but privately owned, privately rented, I accept, unless we have a complaint in around that property, unless that person comes to us for the service, no, we wouldn't know.
Okay, thanks. I've got some other questions, but not at this stage.
All right, bro. Yeah, I was going to say somebody else come in. In terms of that what you just mentioned, Paul, regarding Galnacha, are they paying us to do the? Yeah. Okay. They when I met with them a few years ago, they did say that if the tenants couldn't afford the charge, that they would, as long as they could show that they couldn't, they would pay it, but they don't readily advertise that, which is a bit of a problem.
The only caveat I put to that, Chair, is obviously the numbers we're talking about in terms of the fees aren't high.
Yeah.
So they're probably not going to be enough income for us to justify an additional officer. So it's just to point out that this additional work coming in will fall on the 2 officers we've currently got.
Yeah.
So it will mean us putting more of those officers' time towards pest control, as obviously the RSL referrals come in. Until such a time that the budget would equate to take on an extra officer.
Yeah.
But with the fees we're talking about, that would be way off at this stage, I would imagine. So it's for members to be aware that obviously, the additional demand will have to be met with an existing resource.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, Declan, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a quick question, and it's in regards to 3.5. and it's the last sentence. The pest control service was free to residents until 2018. Sean, can you check that? Is that correct, please? Because as far as I know, that was brought in round about 2016 after a PricewaterhouseCoopers were brought in by the administration at that time to save money.
Yeah, in terms of the report that was brought in by PricewaterhouseCoopers, I think that was at the time the charges were suggested that they needed to be brought in, Councillor Salmon. But in terms of specific dates it was implemented, I'll have to come back to you.
Thanks, Paul. Dec, do you want to come back in?
I'm sure Clive Jones would know. Clive is sitting there. I think Clive was around at that time. Or maybe it's best for the officer to come back at some stage.
Take you out of the bus, Clive. Clive, go, Kevin.
I've been around a long time, Mr. Mayor. It is roundabout the 2016 mark from my memory of it. You're right. PricewaterhouseCoopers came in with all sorts of suggestions. We were in the middle of the austerity program from our friends at 10 Downing Street, where local authorities throughout the United Kingdom were being starved of cash, and different things had to be done. And this was, in my opinion, I disagreed with it at the time. I still disagree with it. I think that, I think charging one thing is one thing, but I think there should be no charge, particularly for rats. I'm sorry about that, but that's a comment.
No problem. Thanks, Clive. Anna, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Focusing on the trial that's ongoing in Penydarren, can I ask what other areas were considered for this pilot and what was the rationale for ultimately using Penydarren?
That is our area of greatest demand for rat service requests and complaints relating to waste in gardens. And it was identified that that was one of the worst areas, so we thought we'd start with that one.
Thank you. In the data that's been provided to us, there doesn't seem to be, just based on that data alone, a significant difference between Penydarren and, for example, Town Ward. So is there further data available which identifies a persistent problem in Penydarren?
But both those years have indicated an issue. This is a trial. We had to pick somewhere to start with, and it was on the basis of the amount of service requests we're receiving. We will need to review that and decide where we go next if we think it is a worthwhile piece of work.
Perhaps I can come in there as well, Chair. In terms of Penydarren, obviously what the intelligence and the complaints identified were a lot of RSL properties. So it lent itself to a multi-agency approach where perhaps the town centre, due to the makeup of the town centre with the commercial, obviously we've got some areas which are in the process of being redeveloped, wouldn't have lent itself to multi-agency working as well as the Penydarren ward. So we saw that as an opportunity where with limited resource, we can make the biggest impact. If that proves to be successful, then we can roll out that same programme to other areas where we've got other partners that we can call on to work with us.
Yeah, can I just come in, Anna, 2 seconds? Yeah, I think, and that area identified under the WIMD is, one of the poorest areas within Wales, I guess, and talking about what Clive said earlier in terms of them buying their own like cheap, happy shopper rat poison. I think it is identified as as a councillor in the next ward over. I think that is probably the area which needed to be targeted most within the borough, from my point of view, anyway. So, thank you.
And what has been the response from residents so far in the trial?
We haven't engaged directly with the residents there, but through the RSL, they have engaged with residents, certainly where there's improvements required, such as I think one of them, off the top of my head, was to design some sort of more convenient storage of waste pending collection on a weekly basis. That would help with managing their waste. So there's a piece of work moving forward in consulting with them over that. Yeah, that's where we're at with it.
Thank you. And just to pick up on the note which says that the RSL has agreed to pay for pest control treatment to all their properties, could you clarify if that relates solely to properties in Penydarren or across the borough, and for what time period they've agreed to do this?
The statement in the report is specifically to do with the properties identified in that area. But I do understand that there is a willingness, certainly to provide pest control treatment, certainly where there's defects within a property that has given rise to rodents accessing the property.
Sorry, and have they committed to that for a particular time period?
No, well, for this particular project, they've obviously submitted purchase orders for those properties concerned. But as far as defective properties, they are responsible for maintaining those properties. So if that's the cause of an infestation, I would suggest that they may extend that offer to any such properties.
Thank you. And just with regards to 5.4, in terms of a referral process being developed with registered social landlords, could you confirm if all RSLs operating in the borough have agreed to these referrals?
Again, we're going to start with this particular registered social landlord. My intention is to take whatever we agreed with this particular one to a forum where they all attend to see if they would be happy for such a referral form. It is utilised for all our RSLs.
Okay, thank you. That's me for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Sean. Nobody else is indicating questions. I've got a couple. 3.7. Obviously, there's the charges are there. Income. These were brought in to become cost neutral. Is it cost neutral, and how far off if it isn't?
It's not cost neutral. Because it includes other functions as well, as mentioned earlier on, such as dog warden and abandoned vehicles. I think it's quite a long way off, possibly 50%, but that's, I'd have to look at the data more accurately, but I'm pretty sure it's a long way off being fully self-funding.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Earlier you mentioned there was only one full-time person. Is there a current backlog, and if so, how far? Say if somebody requests somebody, they got pest control issues, how quickly could they get to them?
There are a backlog of complaints on the individual's workload, but they mainly seem to be revisits rather than initial visits. So any complaints that are made with regards to rodents in properties are being responded to in the normal time frame, and all initial appointments are being made as soon as they practically can. But getting back to the appointments to pick up beef boxes and things, they are the ones that there is a bit of a delay on.
Okay, thank you. That's me done. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Yeah, my question is around the Gleeblan site, the old bus station site, regarding the position with the rats at the moment. I know we have baited in there, but do we revisit it at all at certain intervals, or has it got to be reported again for us to visit?
No, I don't think there's no contract with the authority for baiting. And just checking very quickly with Mel, it doesn't appear to be a high complaint site for us in environmental health.
Well, I get contacted at least 3 times a week by the hairdresser and the busy bee, along with the cafe on the corner of the lunchbox. And, I know that they food outlets, obviously you're going to have these rats around the place. But I've seen for myself, they call me over. There's hundreds running around in there. And we did have a problem with one manhole cover, which had been lifted from there, and they were coming up through there. But I think that was replaced. I think that was done, but there's still an enormous amount of rats running around there.
I'll speak to my colleagues. Obviously, we're currently managing the site, and I'll try and get some feedback in terms of what contractor they're using for any pest control services, and I'll ensure the information comes back to you, John.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the busy bee, the guy in there, said to me that David had been over our boy. Don't know if that's right, but he did mention his name.
I'll double check and come back to
Check
you with
it.
definite information.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Clive?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Bear with me, and I'm reading this from my laptop as well. In relation to the pilots in Garnacha, is it possible to get an action log this pilot? That'll give more specific actions with completion dates and measures of success. That could be given some form of RAG status to identify how well it is working.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to let it run a few more weeks. And I'm happy to provide something via Councillor Michelle Simmons for you with an update and an outcome at that stage, if that's okay.
Can I make another suggestion? Why don't we invite Merthyr Valley's Homes in as well, alongside, to discuss this pilot? Do you think that would work?
You can certainly ask whether they'd wish to attend, Chair. Whether we can summons them, I don't know. But I think, even if we didn't, if the RSL didn't come back, and I can't see any reason why they wouldn't, in fairness, but we'd be more than happy to return with a report on an update, should you wish to schedule us for a future scrutiny.
Well, thank you. Clive, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. We here as a scrutiny committee, they should, in the partnership work that we've got with them, they should welcome the fact that they'd be coming here and be asked pertinent questions, because it should happen. And we need to know, as this is a real black hotspot as far as rats, etc., is concerned, exactly how they're getting on with it as the managers of the houses that they're responsible for. Other question, if I can find it here. Yes. How will well, I brought it up. How will Merthyr Valley Homes manage the tenancy agreements where tenants refuse to cooperate with officers of all parties concerned to improve the standards and the cleanliness of the area? For example, the eviction notices for breach of their tenancy agreements. I know they're not here, but they need to accept responsibility.
I think the tenancy management wouldn't be something we could give you any expertise on.
No.
What I can say for RSLs is legislation in terms of preventing evictions have tightened. So I think it's possibly not as simple to evict somebody on this issue. I think if we came to a tenancy that was persistently causing issues for others in the community and wasn't reacting, as Sian alluded to in the first part of her presentation, prosecution remains a possibility for the authority. And at the very worst, if it was persistent in nature and even a prosecution didn't cure it, we can look at our antisocial behaviour powers with the premise closure.
Right.
So there are mechanisms, but as I say, I wouldn't be able to give you detailed guidance on what they can do under tenancy. I think that would be something for the RSL to answer to.
Yeah.
If I could come in there as well, this is a particularly deprived ward. It may need a bit more assistance from both the social landlord and the authority as a waste collection authority in educating and supporting some of these. For example, when we, issue when waste is not collected correctly presented, that it's not left there, that there is a mechanism of informing the social landlord to chase that up in a timely way and to give that support to those tenants. Yeah, they need that additional support as well.
I mean, all these tenants sign the tenancy agreement when they move in. So there's a long list of them. I understand what you just said. I mean, many decades ago, I was an employee in the housing department when it was part of the local authority. But nevertheless, if somebody keeps their gardens in a completely untidy state and does absolutely nothing to deal with the overgrowth, for example, they can be brought to account by the landlord. In regard to the door knocking exercise, do we know when this will be scheduled to take place for local ward members there to assist if necessary?
I don't have a date of when that's going to happen or whether it has happened. We were due to have our next meeting next week. Unfortunately, because the social landlord wasn't able to attend, it's been pushed forward to the following week. And I'll pick that up with them if it hasn't happened, to engage with the local board members.
So sorry, Claire. Have you got many more? I'm just conscious of time is going on. Okay.
How do we ensure that if there's cameras placed there, that they protect it from damage?
In terms of our public space cameras, and this is I think something that's important for us to clarify. We couldn't put cameras up to look at specific properties.
Right.
We would put public space cameras up to look at antisocial behaviour in an area. But if we were to put a camera up to look at a specific property, we would probably be breaching Human Rights Act, and we'd have to go through court orders in order to get that authority to surveil a property. Merthyr Valley Homes have a range of cameras, which I think one of the members alluded to earlier. They're probably not fit for purpose in some areas as they've been damaged. And we have spoken to the RSL about the possibility of them making a contribution to the authority. And we would then look to put a public space camera in that area, but again with the caveat that it couldn't be used for surveillance on a property. It would be there for an area. So what that may cover is if there's fly tipping in an area in general, such as we've got in the town centre, our cameras would be ideal. And as members will know, the standard of the cameras we put up and the way that they are installed are as, and I hate saying this because I know what will happen after I say it, but they're as bulletproof as they can be. So they would probably lend themselves, a fixed camera would probably be a better long-term option for a particular area.
And the leaflet that you intend to hand out, there at some stage. You're going to hand out leaflets to the educational leaflets, etc.
I think it was the door knocking exercise for
knocking,
the enforcement
Right.
education officer potentially in waste and tenancy management within the social landlords.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Luke. I've got one final question. Hilary?
Thank you. I wanted to come back, if I could, to food source 3.8. Someone told me a little while back that the bird feeders are adding to the problem with rats. And I just wondered, is there any evidence of this at all?
Well, it depends what you mean by evidence. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that was the case. I'm not aware of any studies on that, but it wouldn't surprise me if any food is left out, it is likely to attract rodents.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Apparently it was a pest control officer who told a relative of mine in the south of the valleys that in his experience, bird feeders were contributing to this. And I must say, I know it's only anecdotal evidence, but the two people I'm aware of who have problems with rats either live next door to someone with lots of bird feeders or has a bird feeder themselves. So that was just of interest. And it comes back again to educating the public. I know many of us like to feed our feathered friends over the winter and the RSPB encourage it. But if there's surplus food, I think it adds to the problem, really. So it is back to, educating the public. And I must say, in terms of my involvement in this committee, I'm learning more and more. Especially wasp removal, I wasn't aware of that. And again, a near neighbour is controlling the rat problem himself by buying rat food. And I heard earlier the point about it's actually adding to the problem. And this person could actually afford the £40 fee. So I think, again, general awareness for the public is quite key, really, for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Hilary. Okay, no more questions. Any comments? Clive?
Just a quick one, Chair. I really think that as an authority and as a directorate that we need to look at the capacity covering pest control, the dog walking function and the abandoned vehicle complaints. I think we're really down to the bare bones there, and that I think needs to be looked at, and now is the opportune time to do so.
Agreed. Any other comments? No. Okay, I'd like to thank Sean, Paul and Melissa for coming. You're welcome to stay. I'm sure you'd love to. You're welcome to leave as well. Just come in. Okay. Item agenda 5, Housing Support Grant Spending Plan 2023-2024. I'd like to invite Suzanne Stevens to present the report.
Thank you. The report outlines the changes to the Housing Support Grant Delivery Plan for 23-24 to enable the authority to refocus its priorities and ensure it meets its statutory homeless duties under the Housing Wales Act to be able to work towards an exit strategy to reduce the number of people that we currently have in temporary accommodation and to increase the broad range of accommodation required to meet the presented need. I think just to give the report some context, I think it's pertinent to mention that we still have over 170 people, most of which are single across all of our temporary and supported accommodation, with 111 still in B&B accommodation as of last week. Further legislative changes are being considered by Welsh Government, and it's anticipated that whilst there has been some relaxation in us being able to use B&B accommodation for longer than is stipulated under the suitability of accommodation order, this will shortly change and we'll be instructed by Welsh Government to stop using B&B altogether. Therefore, it's now a priority for the local authority to increase its supported accommodation provision, not only to help reduce the authority's temporary accommodation costs, but also to ensure that we can meet our statutory homeless duties to avoid any costly legal challenges going forward. As stated in the report, we've secured £1.5 million capital funding to be able to lease Marsh House, formerly known as Glanarava Nursing Home, to be able to provide a 32-bed supported accommodation provision. In addition to the capital funding, we now require an estimated £500,000 of additional revenue funding to be able to deliver the support element within the project. As there's no co-funding revenue available at this point in time, we have approached Welsh Government to request that consideration be given to increasing the level of funding Merthyr currently receives through its housing support grant, but unfortunately this request was unsuccessful. It's worth pointing out at this point in time that obviously the level of funding that Merthyr receives through the HSG distribution formula is very small in comparison to other local authorities and does not reflect the high level of deprivation in the area. Therefore, we have no alternative but to review all our existing HSG funded projects and refocus our priorities for 23-24 in line with our housing support programme strategy and rapid rehousing transition plans. Section 6.3 lists what factors we've considered as part of this exercise and the rationale for the decisions made, which will result in changes to the HSG spend plan for 23-24 as set out in 7.1 and 7.2 of the report. The appendices attached to the report evidence the RAG rating exercise also completed as part of this task to identify the corporate risks to the authority in reducing and cutting some of these services. The proposed spend plan, as detailed in the appendix, is to be submitted to Welsh Government for approval by the 31st of January.
Thanks, Suzanne. Open up to questions. Councillor Williams-Price.
Thank you. So at 4.1, where you state that there's been no additional HSG funding available for this financial year, but I think you mentioned it is guaranteed until 2025. How long has the HSG been set at this current level?
We did see a slight increase back in 2021 by just over £600,000, but the current funding is set now to the 31st of March 2025.
Thank you. So £600,000 was previously 2.2 million and was increased to £600,000.
Yeah.
Okay. And at 5.4, it's noted about Welsh Government's financial contribution to temporary accommodation is expected to cease, but I believe that's not the current position. Could you provide an update on that?
That's correct. Obviously, at the time of writing the report, that was the case, but we have had confirmation that further funding will be available in 23-24. I'm not sure of the figure off the top of my head, but it's just over 400,000, I believe.
And at 7.6, with regards to decommissioning of services, specifically Citizens Advice Merthyr, what alternative funding streams are available to this type of service, and at what stage are the discussions with Citizens Advice to source alternate funding for them?
Yeah, I'll pick that up again. Communication is taking place between the organisation and ourselves today, and we meet next Tuesday to explore opportunities for funding. So whilst nothing's guaranteed, My other team, the European External Funding team, are scoping out opportunities as we speak. And we are expecting some information to come in from the organisation. So that team is pretty clear about what it's trying to do. Yeah.
Thank you. If I could address this one to Geraint Thomas, Cabinet Member for Housing, can I ask when did you become aware of the decision to decommission Citizens Advice Services?
I can't recall the exact date, but it would have been roughly beginning of November, if I'm right, Chris Hughes, around that period of time. So it would have been around there, Anna.
Thank you. And what oversight did you have of the decommissioning process as set out in Welsh Government guidance for the HSG?
I met with the officers who made it plainly aware that the cab service which they were currently operating wouldn't be eligible under the guidance, under the new guidance, and so it would have to cease. And we all know that the Marsh House is a big project that we've got going forward to house some of our most complex and chaotic people with the right packages of care and support, and that the funding that was required for them would need to be taken away as part of the housing support grant.
Thank you. As homelessness and the council's response to it is such a priority and also interconnected with the regeneration of the town centre, is it a concern to you that such decisions are being made on these services without being reported to Cabinet or full council?
As I said earlier, you know, it just wasn't eligible. If it was eligible, there was a way of going forward, perhaps with CAB, but as I understand it, you know, it's not eligible for funding through the housing support grant.
In light of changes to the financial position of the council, in this, we received a higher local government settlement than anticipated, and also, as Suzanne mentioned, a further £400,000 has since been announced to support other homelessness pressures. Do you believe the decision was premature with regards to withdrawal of this funding, and could alternative funding be sourced prior to the communication with CA Citizens Advice?
No, I met with the CEO and officers of Citizens Advice. I think it was at the beginning of December. And I think, you know, you have to be fair to the staff at there as well. If you had to make a decision and staff had to be redundant, they had to have that time and knowledge, the appropriate type of knowledge to make those decisions. So, yeah, I think it's totally fair.
Can I just come in on that to clarify the extra funding? So the extra funding notification was last Friday, right? So part of that is capital. Right? So there's a capital allocation in relation to, the title is the Transitional Capital Accommodation Allocation. There is a revenue allocation, but that's to be supported to the temporary accommodation angle. So in theory, where the report is alluding to a £2.9 million gap in revenue, that entitlement is a proportion to shrink that in effect, not HSG related. Does that make sense?
If I come back as well, I would say, you know, although we've had a higher than expected increase in revenue funding from Welsh Government at 7%, we've still got £11 million shortfall that we've got to find this year. And I've heard earlier discussions about finding staff in different areas, but that's going to be very, very difficult when we set the budget process, the budget coming up in the next few weeks or months.
Thank you. Could I ask for clarification then? If Welsh Government guidance changed in April 2020, on what basis have Citizens Advice been receiving HG funding in the intervening period?
So the Citizens Advice were receiving what was formerly Supporting People funding prior to the new guidance when that was introduced in April 2020. The guidance wasn't issued to us until the March 2020, and local authorities, or certainly we, weren't aware of the specific change that was being made to the eligibility for specialist advice services. So obviously, this will stick in people's minds, I'm sure, but that was at the point where the UK and basically half the world or the whole world went into lockdown. So based on that, we were given guidance by Welsh Government to be as flexible as possible with all funded services, because obviously for obvious reasons at that time there weren't many services or organisations operating as they would otherwise due to the pandemic.
Thanks. And so that flexibility continued into 21, 22?
Yeah, up until now, obviously now that there has been some relaxation, we're aware of the pending review that was happening on the HSG and the fact that the contract had already been awarded for that year. We did allow further flexibility for it to continue to run for the current financial year.
Thanks. And have you had confirmation from Welsh Government that confirms that this type of device is not eligible for HSG funding?
We did seek advice from Welsh Government at the time, but they basically just referred us back to the guidance itself and advised us that it was a local authority decision.
Thank you. Because reviewing the guidance, you refer to citizens' advice as providing, I think, type 4 and 5. I'm not sure how it was classified, but there's 5 types of advice the providers can give. And all 5 are listed as within the Welsh Government guidance, and there doesn't seem to be reference there that type 4 and 5 is not eligible.
I think it's not that area that we're suggesting is ineligible. You will see at 5.5, the guidance does state that any specialist advice service is only eligible where it provides an holistic support package. So I suppose just giving an example where my colleague mentioned earlier that people in houses often have difficulty in doing simple things like recycling, that would be considered part of an holistic support package. And certainly with our other floating support services, we do expect there to be a certain level of home visits, which due to the very nature of what Citizens Advice deliver isn't part of that model.
Thank you. And looking at the full list, Citizens Advice seem to be the main source of support for those who are at risk of becoming homeless. So it's preventative rather than focusing on rehousing people who have become homeless. The concern is what organisations should people turn to if they're at risk of being made homeless if this preventative service isn't in place? And is there a risk that a number of individuals the number of individuals presenting as homeless could potentially increase if this service doesn't continue?
Okay, so firstly, obviously the advice that Citizen Advice currently offer will still exist, albeit on a reduced capacity possibly. And also there are alternative funding streams that potentially they can access to bridge that gap. There are also other organisations such as Christians Against Poverty, National Debt Helpline, just to name but a few, that are available to other members of the public to access a similar service.
Thanks. So the hope is essentially that although this funding is being removed, Citizens Advice will be able to continue to deliver the service.
Obviously, as far as I'm aware, that they're not purely reliant on HSG funding, so there will be a core element of their service that people will still be able to access for the same advice.
And what assessment has been made of alternative organisations and their reach and engagement within the borough?
Well, obviously, we do work around some digital inclusion. So those that are accessible online, we can support people to do that. And that can also happen through our alternative floating support services as well, where there aren't any access to online services. Our other floating support services will also help people to access those services if they're available face to face.
Thank you. And just looking at the breakdown of figures on how this money is spent compared to last year to this year, Can I ask, what is the £52,000 spent on Marsh House in this financial year relate to?
That was a figure that was set in the original spend plan due to the delays in the implementation of the scheme. Then it's unlikely there will be any expenditure against that for this financial year.
The £500,000 cost allocated to Marsh House for the next financial year, is that the cost for the full year, bearing in mind that it'll only become operational in September?
At this point in time, it is just an estimated cost. The tender for that support service is out as we speak. So once that closes, we will have a better idea of what the exact cost will be. But if there is a delay in the service, then potentially there will be an underspend possibly in the next financial year.
And if an underspend is identified, how will the decision be made on where to allocate that?
Just in the usual way, really. Obviously, we will look at our existing schemes to see if there's any underspend, or because obviously with the increase in the cost of living, salary costs have gone up. So some of the projects are being delivered at a cost to the actual organisation. So we would offer additional funding to those in the first instance. We also then ask other organisations to put in what we call off-the-shelf projects that can possibly be delivered short term just to meet that underspend.
Sorry, on top of that as well, the most important point in the summary report is the delivery plan needs to focus on its priorities to ensure it meets its homelessness duties and its statutory duty. And that's the key point of the report, really. And that's the exercise we've carried out in terms of the opportunity that bestowed on us in terms of 1.5 million on Marsh House, right? And the service required to meet that critical need, and hence hopefully the reduction on the revenue at 2.9 million. I'll always go back to that. That's what's driving us to save the authority 2.9 million always. The other point I want to re-emphasize as well, what's driving that as well is the 112 people that are in temporary accommodation, B&Bs. If we are pressurized to enforce that act, we'll have 112 people with nowhere to go, right? I'm sure you'll be aware we'll have a members workshop being planned where we will be enforcing or reinforcing this message again. We need another 4 Marsh Houses, right, to absorb the 112. Otherwise, that revenue bill is always going to be at that threshold of 3 million. Yeah. So I was going to mention that later, but I thought I'll put that on there now because that's what's driving the team and the authority, I feel, to reduce that burden of revenue. Yeah. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you. If you just allow me one more, Lee, and then I'll give way then. Just with regards, there's a listed in other homeless. No, sorry, it's non-statutory HSG posts. There's a listed vacant post which is described as HP and IE. Could you clarify what the purpose of that post is, whether it's due to be filled, and why there's no variance listed against it in the breakdown?
Okay, that is a new post that has gone to CMT this week for approval. I've yet to know the outcome of that. But that was in terms of additional pressures that are placed on the service. So that post will primarily be to provide additional support to people within the community, obviously to prevent homelessness.
It's prevention and thank you.
Yeah, sorry. We've given it a different title because it has less responsibility than some of the the other EIP posts in the spend plan. Hence why it's just got a different job title.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. If this definitely happens and £276,000 disappears from the funding in citizens' advice, who is going to do the work of currently 14 members of staff, 8 full-time and 6 part-time? They'll be made redundant. Do you have the in the housing department the total capacity to undertake the work covering 530 plus clients that they are dealing with. Currently, that's the caseload of citizen advice until the 31st of March. And how will the clients be supported?
Okay, firstly, we commission the service in hours. So it's 196.5 hours that we commission. So I don't think that would quite equate to 8 full-time and 6 part-time members of staff. So I think those staff you're referring to aren't purely funded through the Housing Support Grant. Certainly not based on the figures we've been provided by Citizens Advice anyway in terms of the funding. So as I said, I would question that. Sorry, can you repeat the question again? It was quite a long question.
Yeah. Who's going to do the work of the 14 citizen advice staff they currently have covering these 530 plus going to be made redundant? Do you have in the housing department the total capacity to undertake the work of 530 plus clients that they're dealing with until the 31st of March? And how will the clients be supported?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, alternative funding opportunities are being explored. And as I mentioned, there will still be a service that CAB will deliver to local people. Obviously, it wouldn't be a service that the housing department itself would actually bridge that gap. But one thing we would be looking at in terms of other funding streams is potentially another post within our hub in Merthyr Tydfil, but that is yet to be agreed. So I wouldn't want to go into any more detail on that at this point in time.
So, sorry, just to add as well, you might find myself repeating myself quite a lot. It's back to the priorities, right? And making sure we spend HSG in a way that takes the burden off homelessness, Clive. I get what you're saying, but it's back to priorities, right? And look, we're not in a position to ask the question who'll do that work. I think it's up to the organisation. If that's their remit, we won't be picking up that work internally within the local authority.
I have to ask this question because you as officers arranged a meeting and saw the chief executive and others, I think, on the 23rd of November. And as a result of that meeting, they were given advice that contact would be made with them about external funding. Now that's nearly tapping on for nearly 2 months ago. And the meeting's been arranged for next Tuesday. So there's 2 months past. Well, as you can imagine, the staff and the chief executive concerned are wondering what is happening. And we're only weeks away from the 31st of March. So why wasn't a meeting arranged much earlier to advise them of external funding if this is out there and able to be applied for?
Thanks for the question. The email went to the organisation on the 22nd of December at 11 o'clock. I chased the response yesterday and I had a reply yesterday. So that meeting was set up for next Tuesday. So I didn't have a problem meeting with these guys on that day. So I asked for dates, asked for times. So we left it with the organisation, Clive, to come back to us. I've got a copy of the email here if you want it.
But when they were just before Christmas, when they were just asked to arrange the meeting, is that right? Okay.
Can I just come in as well, just to clarify that the additional 76,000 that was issued to CAB for the last 2 years was always agreed on a temporary basis anyway. That was due to underspend and that we had for those financial years, just to clarify that.
In relation to COVID?
Not specifically, it's just because we knew that there would the longer term there would be funding needed for Marsh House or any alternative supported accommodation, then we couldn't sort of release those funds for any long-term projects. And so some of those that are listed as being decommissioned were always aware that this funding was on a very temporary basis. And for the past 2 years, because again, we've known about the changes we would have to make in all the support provider forums, we've always reinstated the fact that everything would be reviewed over the next 2 years, and potentially, you know, there would be cuts to all the services. So that certainly has been on the horizon. So all organisations would have been aware of the potential of cuts forthcoming.
And on the point of information, they had this bombshell on the 23rd of November. And my understanding is they asked if this could be put in writing. And there was radio silence for some weeks until a few days before Christmas. Is there any reason why things went silent?
I'll have to backtrack on that, Clive, just to get the dates right, but I know we were talking internally about some of the decisions, trying to look what alternative funding was possible even at that time, right? So I do know that there was a gap, right? But I'll have to check back in terms of the actual dates.
So coming to blowing this massive hole through the citizen advice finances, why wasn't alternative methods of funding this £500,000 gap to manage Marsh House? Why hadn't that been examined a long time ago?
Well, this is the part that we're reviewing now. 2 years ago, we knew we would have to review all the HSG projects and refocus and prioritise. Hence why we advised all the providers that potentially cuts would be coming or decommissioning. So we did look at this 2 years ago, really, but obviously we weren't in a position at that point to actually notify the organisations officially, because one, obviously we didn't know at that point in time whether the supported accommodation would actually be secured. Because as you know, we have come across a lot of barriers in this process. And so they would have been more than aware, as I said, that potentially those schemes, would cease. And, they are only awarded on an annual contract. So there's no longer term sort of commitment offered on any of our HSG contracts.
In addition as well, I think we've drawn reference to this in the report, unprecedented challenges, yes, nationally, but Merthyr is really feeling the strain on housing homelessness at the moment. We feel the distribution formula is well under what we actually need. So we are somewhat disappointed in terms of Welsh Government's lack of response on this agenda. I think we do recognise, yes, absolutely capital-wise in terms of the additional money to align to reduce the £2 million. But this is revenue support where it's really, really needed. So we are a bit disappointed, Clive. 6.1 does draw reference to that. And we had hoped for an additional HSG grant based on the circumstances Merthyr is in at the moment.
So, Chair, to avoid the situation which we find ourselves in, with the sword of Damocles being hung over citizens' advice, why is it obviously the decision making that you've made as officers, which appears to have meant that other members outside the cabinet would have no involvement with this whatsoever? Why couldn't the situation be looked at where there are several organizations mentioned in the report where a percentage reduction, equal reduction, could be made right across the board to avoid the situation that citizen advice are confronted with?
I think there's quite a simple answer to that, is based on the eligibility. Based on the current business model and service delivery, it's our opinion of officers that they're not eligible for HSG funding.
Do you accept that the reviews which your HSG monitoring officer has made, that has been always be provided with positive feedback from citizens' advice?
Absolutely, no. Our decision to decommission this service has no reflection on the good work that Citizens Advice do, is purely on eligibility.
Under section 2.10.4 of the guidance, HSG providers who provide advice or advice with casework services must be able to demonstrate appropriate quality insurance mechanisms are in place and to ensure advice provided is accurate and delivered appropriately. Citizens Advice are accredited by AQS and IAOF standards. Do you agree that Citizens Advice have the accredited standards and other local providers may not have these accredited standards?
I think the question is probably irrelevant. As I said, the decision to decommission is purely based on the eligibility. We're not disputing the quality of the work that Citizens Advice have delivered whatsoever. You know, we congratulate them for the good work that they've done for the vulnerable within the local community. It's purely based on the eligibility and the fact that due to the very nature of the business, they don't deliver that holistic support package for an example of what I gave earlier.
For years, Citizens Advice has provided has helped produce over 8 million of income. This money goes back into the local economy and has enabled individuals and families to pay their rent, mortgages, and to pay off debt and arrears. Section 2.10.6 of the guidance states that providing independent budgeting and debt counselling support is an integral part of the HSG. Do you accept that statement?
I do, but again, going back to my previous response, that's not what we base our decision on.
Chair, can I ask where these line of questions are going now, please?
Yeah, life.
I think well, I'm trying to get answers. You were the decision makers. Nobody else is involved. It's eligibility from start to finish. So I presume that that's been examined by the legal officers from end to end, and there is nothing in there that cannot be done by yourselves to help these people.
I wouldn't go as far as say it's been examined by our legal team, but what I will say, we have a very experienced team of officers that have been dealing with housing for many, many years, and you'll know that, right? Our judgment, I feel, is pretty accurate on this occasion, based on the priorities this local authority needs to do to tackle homelessness and its statutory duties, right? So we can answer these questions all nightly if you want.
Do you have any more, Clive?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Anna, would you like to come back in?
There was discussion of this based on the information report that came to full council. I was just wondering if you could give an update on what your expectation is and what we will see when that comes back to full council.
Yeah, we yet to pick that back up with the Deputy Chief Executive and Cabinet in terms of what that report will actually look like and fulfill. So we yet to, there's still what that actually means. That makes sense. What are you expecting? Just
Okay.
get a feel for what you're expecting, really.
I think the expectation was that it would allow full discussion at full council of these issues. But I suppose the question where we are now is if a report is brought to full council in February, which allows a full discussion, what is the scope for the ability to have any influence on this decision?
And it's back to the eligibility in terms of the plan. So I don't really know what that will change, because as officers, we've determined that it does not meet the criteria of that programme. So I don't really know of what benefit bringing another report will be back to council to debate what. I'm trying to think of what the recommendations will be. If it's a report to bring back to approve the plan, absolutely. But my report will not be changing.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Thomas, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment, really. In the spring of 2020, we answered the call of Welsh Government to get everybody in, and that's what we did. We got everybody off the streets and into temporary accommodation. At the time, it was 12. Then it quickly rose then to 100, to where we are now of 170 people. And now the call again is to get them out as quick as we can, because temporary accommodation isn't appropriate. So it did its job, it had its time, but now we have to build and we have to staff the right kind of facilities, and it's going to cost a lot of money, as you can see just by the Marsh House project. We're going to have difficult decisions to make along this journey, right, over the next few years, to house the 170 people that we've got in temporary accommodation now. I've been asked today, I had an email today from the Minister of Housing, Julie James, to attend a crisis conference in Machynlleth on February 18th, a Saturday. You don't see many ministers working on a Saturday. So that's how bad this problem is. And it's really bad. What I would like to have seen today, from the Scrutiny Committee, is to look at the report, the Housing Support Grant spend for 23-24, on the whole holistic approach to homelessness. And what we've had today is just talk about one element of it, which was Citizens Advice. Now, Citizens Advice offer a fantastic service to the residents of Merthyr Tydfil. And as a council, we support them as best we can. But as I said earlier, £11 million we have to save this year as a local authority. Welsh Government have said there's no more money coming for housing support. They've already said that. The First Minister said that. There's no more money for housing support grants. So we are in a dilemma. We really are, right? And like I said, there will be difficult decisions to make, and we've got to make them as a council and as an authority. So we need to get behind our officers on the decisions they make and support them to get the homeless people in temporary accommodation into proper temporary accommodation and then into tenancies. And that's our journey, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So I hope we all get behind our officers and support them. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Thomas. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. 5.5, Rent in Homes Act, is regarding that. The original date was set for the 31st of March 2023. It's now been delayed. Any indication how long that's been delayed for?
Not at this point in time, but we anticipate it will be sometime in 2023.
Okay. And following on from that, what discussions have been had with the Airbnbs of this world, where they are?
Sorry, can you just repeat that, Chris? Sorry, I just hard to hear it.
That's all right. Sorry, I'm a bit quiet sometimes. What discussions have been had with the B&Bs? Obviously they're not going to want to become the landlord. So what discussions have been had with them?
No, absolutely. So in terms of the changes with the Rent in Homes Act, there has been some sort of flexibility with the B&Bs in that they won't have to become landlords then under that act until the 1st of December 2023. So obviously it is a challenge for the local authority to move people out to B&B within that time, but we haven't had specific discussions in terms of continuing that contract with them really for temporary accommodation. Hopefully we won't have to, but as I said, it's a challenge that we do face, and it's a very significant one.
Thanks, James. Chris?
Just another point, really. The term B&B is the notion behind that, and the influences for tourists. Right? And for years, we've used B&Bs for homelessness. That's not good. Right? So with my tourism hat on, we have a tourism drive here, haven't we? Right? So yes, we want to get people out in B&Bs. Most of the B&Bs are, I feel, in an inadequate environment. Mostly, there's money to invest in the hotels and guest houses and B&Bs. So there's another drive here, isn't there? Right. Back to my point earlier, we need another 4 big buildings in Merthyr Tydfil that we can replicate the Marshalls model. So we chip away at the 112, and our B&Bs come back to the market. So with our business support dimension on, we start to improve the fabric of the B&Bs. Because at the moment, believe it or not, the tourists coming to Merthyr cannot stay anywhere, guys. It's all bedlocked with the homelessness. Castle Hotel across the road, absolutely rammed. The revenue receipt for the Castle Hotel was astronomical, right? Because it suited the purpose in terms of homelessness. But in the new world, that's not good enough, is it? Right? And that's that new world we need to get into together, so we start to change the cycle. So just wanted to mention that. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, no, I think it's pertinent. We had bands recently traveling down from Scotland to Red House, and they stayed in Caerphilly. Same, I met somebody from Bike Park Wales, and they were staying out of the borough as well. So it needed mentioning, I guess. Suze, did you want to come in? No, I just seen your finger on a button then. I think you want to come in. Following on from your comment, Chris, you said about we need like 4 marsh houses. Is there any capital funding on the horizon for new properties and developments?
Again, the announcement last week from WG around enhanced capital, we've got to be interested in that, but you've got to have the buildings really that are ready, landlords that are ready, a community that's ready as well, right? Because that's the other side. That's the other side to this. I think we need a community. We need to be together to explain to members in the community what we're actually trying to achieve here. Because obviously we've had some major road bumps in our HMO model, which didn't get much traction in 2022 for in different reasons. So again, this is what we're opening the workshop that we are planning to trying to demystify the challenges ahead and how together we can try to unlock this, Lee. So the short answer, hopefully yes. WG will support good projects, obviously, and we're hoping to be at the table really to secure those buildings.
Okay, but you've identified a number of buildings or parcels of land that is good.
The team have been working with our estate team to identify a suite of assets throughout the county borough that we are keen to explore. And again, we're hoping to share some of this news at the workshop with members, so we're pretty clear about our land plan, what our building plan will look like, and hopefully everybody can lock themselves in really to drive down that revenue. Sorry to go back to that £3 million revenue. That is our target, right? Because we don't want that to be this noose around our head for a long time. Unless we get these buildings, always going to be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Nobody else is indicating questions, so I'll move on to comments. Councillor Williams-Price.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank the officers for answering my questions and the questions of other members. I completely agree that finding a suitable accommodation is imperative to both the individual and also to the wider strategy of town centre regeneration tourism plans. And I just wanted to state that I hope you recognise that my focus on citizens' advice is driven by the concern that in the current cost of living crisis, we may have many more people who are just, you know, closer to homelessness than we would like. And I think this conversation today has just shown the extent of the problem that we're facing in Merthyr Tydfil with regards to homelessness, and difficult decisions, you said, have obviously needed to be made. It's just my concern that by withdrawing services from Citizens Advice, we may see an increase in presentation of homelessness. So that's more my focus has been today. But thank you for answering the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Jones?
I agree, Chair, with everything that Councillor Williams-Price has said. I think this £276,000 loss to Citizens Advice will have a devastating effect, not only on the 14 members of staff, who by the sound of it are due for redundancy, but on the public of Merthyr Tydfil. They're going to receive, in my view, because my experience is that first port of call, I know there are other organizations, but the first port of call nearly always is Citizen Advice. And to a large extent, they are not going to be there or available to provide the service. So I sincerely hope that the meeting next Tuesday will bear fruit on where and when they can have external funding, because clearly in the circumstances, it'll be desperately needed.
Thanks, Clive. I'd just like to thank officers for coming here and answering these questions. I've worked in the third sector for 20 years. It's never nice when funding changes or redundancies come. I've been on the receiving end of it, and it's not very nice. I just hope that local authority and Citizen Advice and some of the other agencies that we support can get together and try and find out some external funding to plug this gap. That's pretty much it for me. So guys, thank you for coming, and thank you for answering these questions. And you guys, yeah, you're welcome to leave as well. Okay, moving on. Agenda item 6, report recommendations. Did we address the recommendations in each report and how we have added value? I think, me personally, I think it was a really good meeting. All 3 reports I'd received some really good questions and had some really good answers. Guys, over to you.
Questions. And I'll bang on about this until I'm not here. We can ask all the pertinent questions in the world, but the questions are recorded, the answers are not given. And I think that's something not akin to this committee, but that's got to be addressed elsewhere somehow.
Are you referring to all the reports or?
Any committee,
Yeah.
council meeting, it's the questions, but this is a matter I've tried to deal with elsewhere, but
Yeah.
I met against a brick wall, unfortunately.
Okay. We'll maybe have a discussion another time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Everybody happy we met the recommendations? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Moving on, agenda item 7, scrutiny forward work programme. We've been asked to consider the self-evaluation report. It's probably, well, me and Neil are going to discuss it. We'll get it out to you. It's probably too soon to bring it to Marches, but it'll probably go to May's. When you're concerned, May's is quite a busy one as well. So yeah, I'll let you know about that. So, oh yeah, we're going to discuss workshops, so maybe we can cover most of the questions within the workshops anyway. Scrutiny item agenda 8, scrutiny referrals. I don't have any. Item agenda 9, feedback on any scrutiny activities. The only thing I've got to tell you is about the police. They still haven't come back yet. I know it's next week, so another email is going out tomorrow. Clive?
This is ridiculous, Chair. I just think, I know you've written to senior officers, but this has come a time now where I think this should be referred to the chief constable ASAP.
That's what will be happening.
If he can't sort out his officers, nobody can.
Yeah, that's what will happen tomorrow. You've got nothing else to do. Okay. Item agenda 10. Any other business deemed urgent by the chair? I don't have any. Yeah. So thank you for coming. And I will see you Thursday, I think. Yeah. Take care all. I'd like to bring a meeting to a close. Steph, sorry, nearly forgot that last line.